The morning light did nothing to ease the heaviness in my bones after a brutal 12-hour night shift. My eyes burned from fatigue as I turned onto my street, my cruiser rumbling beneath me like it shared my exhaustion. All I wanted was to park, shower, and collapse into bed for some well-deserved rest. But as my house came into view, I blinked several times, certain my tired mind was playing tricks on me. My driveway was completely blocked, not just by one car, but by several vehicles parked haphazardly across the concrete. My front lawn, which I had meticulously maintained despite my demanding schedule, was now hosting what appeared to be a garden party. Colorful tables covered in floral arrangements stood where my grass should have been undisturbed. A buffet line stretched along one side, complete with chafing dishes and a tiered cake that must have cost a small fortune. I pulled up behind the last car blocking my driveway and sat for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. People milled about in casual but expensive clothes, champagne flutes in hand, laughing and chatting as if this was a completely normal situation, as if they had not invaded private property without permission. With a deep breath, I stepped out of my cruiser, still in full uniform. I approached the nearest cluster of guests, maintaining what I hoped was a reasonable, professional demeanor despite my exhaustion. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying across the lawn. "There seems to be some confusion. This is my property, and I need to park in my driveway." Several heads turned. Conversations momentarily halted, but then a woman detached herself from the center of activity. She wore an enormous wide-brimmed hat adorned with fake flowers and what appeared to be a designer sundress. Her neck was draped with pearls that caught the sunlight as she stalked toward me, clipboard clutched in one manicured hand. "You cannot park there," she announced, her voice clipped and commanding. "You are ruining my event. Move your vehicle immediately." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. The audacity was almost impressive. I gestured toward my house. "Ma'am, this is my residence. That is my driveway you and your guests have blocked. I am simply trying to come home after my shift." She gave my uniform a dismissive once-over and waved her hand as if shooing away an annoying insect. "We have this area reserved for our community garden fundraiser. You will need to park elsewhere until we are finished." I noticed more details now. Elaborate centerpieces on folding tables, a small string quartet setting up near my oak tree, and catering staff arranging food platters on my lawn. This was not just a casual gathering. This was a full-blown event organized without my knowledge or consent. "Ma'am, there must be a misunderstanding. No one contacted me about using my property. I need these vehicles moved so I can access my driveway," I explained, maintaining an even tone. The woman narrowed her eyes, as if I was deliberately being difficult. "I do not know who you are, but this area has been properly reserved through appropriate channels. Now, if you could please move along, you are creating a scene." I turned to address the gathered guests more broadly. "I apologize for the inconvenience, but there has been a mistake. This is private property, my private property. I need everyone to move their vehicles from my driveway so I can park." Some of the guests looked uncomfortable, glancing between me and the woman with the clipboard. A few began to drift toward their cars, sensing the tension in the air. Others simply stared, champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. The woman stepped closer, her voice lowered but her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You are going to regret this. Do you have any idea who these people are? Who I am?" I met her gaze steadily. "Ma'am, all I know is that this is my property, and I would like to park in my own driveway." She glared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she turned away, muttering just loud enough for me to hear, "You are going to regret this." As some guests reluctantly began moving their vehicles, I caught the calculating look in her eyes. This was not over, not by a long shot. The woman, who I was mentally beginning to refer to as Karen, watched with poorly concealed fury as guests began relocating their vehicles from my driveway. Her face had flushed an alarming shade of red, clashing with her pastel outfit and meticulously applied makeup. As more cars pulled away, she marched back toward me, her clipboard now clutched so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded, her voice rising. "You are trespassing and threatening my guests. This event has been planned for months." I stood my ground, fatigue momentarily forgotten in the face of such blatant dishonesty. "Ma'am, I cannot be trespassing on my own property. This is my home." I gestured toward the house behind us. "I live here." Karen scoffed, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You do not live here. I know everyone in this neighborhood." "I moved in 3 months ago," I explained calmly. "I work night shifts, which is probably why we have not crossed paths before today." She looked me up and down, taking in my state trooper uniform with obvious disdain. "Anyone can buy a costume," she said dismissively. "If you lived here, you would know about this event. Everyone was notified." By now, a small crowd had gathered around us. Some neighbors I recognized vaguely, people I had waved to in passing during my limited time at home. Others were clearly event guests, drawn to the escalating confrontation like moths to flame. "I can assure you, I received no notification about my property being used for any event," I said, keeping my voice level. "Now, I would appreciate it if you could please move the remaining vehicles and equipment from my lawn." Karen reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone, turning slightly away from me. "This is ridiculous. I am going to put an end to this right now." She dialed a number, her back partially turned but her voice intentionally loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, hello. I need to report a situation. There is a man here at our community fundraiser causing a disturbance." Her voice dropped to a dramatic whisper. "Yes, he is claiming to live here and is threatening our guests. He is dressed as a police officer, but I am certain he is impersonating law enforcement." I listened in disbelief as she continued fabricating her version of events into the phone. Around us, the crowd had grown, with neighbors eyeing the scene with varying degrees of curiosity and discomfort. One elderly gentleman caught my eye and shook his head slightly, as if to say he knew exactly what type of person Karen was. "Yes, that is right," Karen continued into her phone, her voice quavering with manufactured fear. "He has a gun. Please send someone quickly." She disconnected the call and turned back to me, a chilling smile spreading across her face. "The authorities will be here shortly. They will sort this out." I maintained my composure despite the absurdity of the situation. As a state trooper, I dealt with difficult people every day. But rarely had I encountered someone so willing to escalate a simple misunderstanding into a potentially dangerous confrontation, especially one involving false claims about an armed individual. "Ma'am, you have just made a false report to emergency services," I said quietly. "That is a serious offense." "I have done no such thing," she replied haughtily. Turning to the assembled crowd, she raised her voice. "Everyone, please remain calm. This man is pretending to be a police officer. Do not be fooled by the uniform. Real authorities are on their way." Several guests began backing away, confusion and concern evident on their faces. Others pulled out their phones, ready to record whatever happened next. I noticed a neighbor I had spoken with once or twice edging toward his house, clearly wanting no part in this circus. I took a deep breath, centering myself. In my years as a state trooper, I had learned that staying calm was often the best weapon in tense situations, and this situation was escalating quickly, more quickly than I could have imagined possible on what should have been a quiet morning at the end of my shift. In the distance, I heard the first wail of a siren. Corinne's eyes lit up with vindictive triumph. She thought she had won this round, but she had severely misjudged both the situation and who she was dealing with. The sirens grew louder, their wail slicing through the otherwise peaceful morning. Moments later, two police cruisers rounded the corner, their blue lights painting the street in flashes of electric cobalt. They screeched to a halt, and officers emerged with precision and purpose, hands hovering near their holstered weapons. "Hands where we can see them," the lead officer shouted, his stance wide and prepared for trouble. I slowly raised my hands, palms forward, making no sudden movements. My heart rate remained steady, a professional courtesy of years of training, but there was something distinctly surreal about being on this side of a police response. "My name is Michael Reynolds," I called out clearly. "Badge number 4726, State Trooper, Eastern Division. My identification is in my right breast pocket, and my service weapon is holstered at my hip." The officers approached cautiously, their eyes scanning for threats. Behind them, Corinne stood with her hand pressed dramatically to her chest, the perfect picture of a citizen in distress. Several onlookers had pulled out phones, recording the unfolding scene with avid interest. "Slowly reach for your ID with 2 fingers only," instructed the lead officer, a man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp. I complied carefully, extracting my credentials and holding them out for inspection. The officer took them, examining the badge and ID card with focused attention. "This is my residence," I explained calmly. "I returned home from night shift to find an unauthorized event taking place on my property. When I asked participants to move their vehicles from my driveway, this woman called in a false report." The older officer's posture changed subtly as he verified my identification. A look of recognition crossed his face, followed by something that might have been embarrassment. "Reynolds, Mike Reynolds," he asked, his voice lower now. "You worked that pileup on Interstate 40 last winter, did you not?" "Yes, sir, that was me." He handed back my credentials, signaling to the other officers to stand down. "We trained at the same academy, different years. Bill Hargrove." I nodded in recognition as the tension in the air began to dissipate. The other officers holstered their weapons, though they remained alert and professional. "What is going on here?" Officer Hargrove asked, glancing toward the remains of the garden party and the cluster of onlookers. "This is absurd," Corinne interjected before I could answer. She strode forward, her wide-brimmed hat bobbing with each indignant step. "This man disrupted our community fundraiser and threatened our guests. Just because he has a badge does not give him the right to ruin our event." Officer Hargrove turned to her with professional patience. "Ma'am, you reported an armed individual impersonating law enforcement. That is a very serious claim." "Well, how was I supposed to know if he was real or not?" she demanded. "He just showed up and started ordering everyone around." "He lives here," interjected an elderly man from the edge of the crowd, the same neighbor who had shaken his head earlier. "Moved in a few months back. Works nights, keeps to himself. Good man." Corinne's eyes narrowed at this unexpected support. If he lives here, why did he not know about the community fundraiser? Everyone was notified. Officer Hargrove turned back to me. "Is this your primary residence, Trooper Reynolds?" "Yes, sir. Purchased 3 months ago. I have all documentation inside if you need to see it." He shook his head, That will not be necessary. He turned to address Karen. Ma'am, did you obtain permission to use this private property for your event? Karen's confidence faltered momentarily before she rallied. This was arranged through proper channels. The homeowners association approved everything. Did you specifically get permission from the homeowner, from Trooper Reynolds? Hargrove pressed. Well, the HOA handles these matters, she stammered. Officer Hargrove pulled me aside, speaking in a lowered voice. Look, I apologize for the response. When we get calls about armed individuals, we have to take them seriously. I understand completely, I assured him. Do you want to press charges for the false report? He asked. I considered this for a moment, watching as Karen paced nearby. Her phone pressed to her ear as she apparently tried to reach someone from the HOA. Not at this time, I decided. I just want to park in my driveway and get some sleep. Hargrove nodded. We will clear them out, get you back to normal. He turned to address the remaining guests and Karen. Folks, this is private property. Unless you have explicit permission from the homeowner, you need to pack up and move your vehicles immediately. Karen's face contorted with anger and embarrassment. This is not over, she hissed as she stormed past me toward a white luxury SUV parked across the street. The officers supervised as the remaining guests gathered their belongings and departed. Catering staff hurriedly packed up food and equipment. Within 20 minutes, my lawn was nearly clear, though trampled grass and scattered debris remained as evidence of the uninvited gathering. Officer Hargrove handed me his card before leaving. If you have any more trouble, call directly. And Reynolds, watch your back with that one. People who make false reports rarely stop at just one incident. I thanked him and finally pulled my cruiser into my now-cleared driveway. As the police departed, I noticed Karen sitting in her SUV across the street, watching. Even through the windshield, I could see the smirk on her face. She may have lost this battle, but her expression made it clear. She believed she would win the war. I was too exhausted to care at that moment. All I wanted was sleep. But as I entered my house, I knew this was far from over. After several hours of much-needed sleep, I awoke to the sound of car doors slamming outside my window. Rubbing my eyes, I peered through the blinds to see the last of the event staff loading folding tables into a van. Apparently, they had returned to collect the items left behind during the hasty departure earlier. What caught my attention, however, was Karen standing on the sidewalk, pointing at my house and speaking animatedly to a man in a polo shirt who appeared to be taking notes. I am not a man who seeks conflict. My years in law enforcement had taught me that escalation rarely solves problems. But those same years had also taught me the importance of documentation and evidence. If Karen was planning what I suspected she was planning, I needed to protect myself. I dressed quickly and grabbed my personal camera, not my department-issued equipment. This was not official business yet, though I had a feeling it might become so eventually. I stepped outside just as the man in the polo shirt was walking away from Karen. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. Taking pictures of the damage your trespassers left on my lawn, I explained before she could speak, snapping several photos of the trampled grass, scattered trash, and tire marks where vehicles had parked on my lawn. You will be hearing from the HOA board, she declared, arms crossed. Your behavior today cost this community thousands in lost donations. I continued documenting the scene, moving methodically around my property. Ma'am, you organized an event on private property without permission. You made a false report to emergency services. If anyone will be hearing from authorities, it will be you. Her face flushed again, but she maintained her composure, retreating to her SUV with a final glare in my direction. As she drove away, I noticed several neighbors watching from their porches and windows. This incident had certainly made an impression on the community. Back inside, I reviewed my home security footage, a system I had installed my first week in the house, a habit from years of law enforcement work. The cameras had captured everything. Karen arriving early that morning, directing staff to set up on my lawn, and even pointing out my driveway as a parking area for guests. There was no mistaking her deliberate actions. I spent the remainder of the day compiling evidence, photographs, video footage, timestamps. I wrote detailed notes while events were still fresh in my memory, including times, names, and specific statements made. While I had told Officer Hargrove I did not want to press charges at that time, I knew better than to leave myself vulnerable without documentation. That evening, my doorbell rang. When I answered, I found myself face to face with an older gentleman who introduced himself as Walter Bryant, the president of the HOA. "Trooper Reynolds, I wanted to personally apologize for today's misunderstanding," he said, his expression genuinely contrite. "Karen Fleming had not received authorization to use your property. She had requested use of the community park, but it seems she expanded the venue without approval." I invited him in, and over coffee, learned more about Karen Fleming, a relatively new resident who had quickly appointed herself the unofficial social chair of the neighborhood. She had organized several successful events before, but had been increasingly taking liberties with HOA rules and neighborly boundaries. "Several homeowners have complained," Walter admitted, "but she brings in significant donations for community improvements, so the board has been lenient." I showed Walter some of the footage from my security cameras. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he watched Karen directing people onto my property. "This is clearly unacceptable," he said finally. "I will bring this to the board immediately." After he left, I organized my documentation into a formal complaint for the HOA. I also prepared an internal report for my department, detailing the false police report. While I had no desire to pursue charges at this stage, having an official record could prove important if the situation escalated. As I sealed the envelope containing my complaint to the HOA, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I did not recognize. "You should have just parked somewhere else. Now everyone will see what happens to people who cross me." I took a screenshot of the message and added it to my growing file of evidence. The embers of conflict were still warm, and I suspected Karen was not finished adding fuel to the fire. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening in the community clubhouse. Normally, I would have been on duty, but I had specifically requested the night off. This was not a confrontation I was looking for, but neither was it one I would avoid. The clubhouse was more crowded than usual according to Walter, who greeted me at the door with a firm handshake. Word had spread about the garden party incident, and residents were curious to see how the matter would be addressed. I took a seat near the back, preferring to observe rather than draw immediate attention. Karen arrived fashionably late, dressed immaculately and flanked by two women who seemed to be her personal entourage. She smiled and waved to various members as if she were a celebrity gracing them with her presence. If she noticed me, she gave no indication. Walter called the meeting to order and proceeded through standard HOA business: budget updates, maintenance schedules, architectural review approvals. I noticed several residents shifting impatiently, clearly waiting for the main event. Finally, Walter cleared his throat. "Now, We need to address a complaint that has been filed regarding an unauthorized event held on private property last weekend. Karen straightened in her chair, her smile faltering slightly. The board has reviewed the complaint and supporting evidence submitted by Trooper Michael Reynolds, a new homeowner in our community, Walter continued, gesturing in my direction. All eyes turned toward me. I nodded acknowledgement but remained silent. Walter proceeded to outline the situation, how Karen had organized an event that encroached on my property without permission, how she had falsely reported me to police when I attempted to access my own driveway, and how security footage confirmed these facts. "This is absurd," Karen interrupted, standing dramatically. "I was told by the previous board that community fundraisers could utilize available spaces. No one said anything about requiring individual permissions." Walter remained unruffled. "Karen, the evidence clearly shows you directed setup on Trooper Reynolds' private property. You did not have HOA approval for that location, nor did you have the homeowner's consent." "Those cameras are an invasion of privacy," Karen declared, changing tactics. "He has no right to record us without consent." "Security cameras on private property recording activity on that same property are perfectly legal," I stated calmly from my seat. "And they captured you telling your staff to use my lawn and driveway before I even arrived home." Karen's face flushed. "He is obviously fabricating evidence. Anyone with basic technical skills could edit that footage." Walter sighed. "The board has reviewed all materials, including statements from witnesses and event staff. We have determined that you violated several HOA bylaws regarding property boundaries, event permissions, and neighborly conduct." He then announced the board's decision. Karen would receive a formal warning and a fine of $500 for unauthorized use of private property. Additionally, she would be required to reimburse me for lawn restoration costs. The clubhouse fell silent as Karen processed this information. Her face cycled through several emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, before settling on rage. "This is outrageous," she exploded. "I have raised thousands of dollars for this community. I have organized every successful event for the past year. And this is how you repay me: by siding with some cop who cannot even be bothered to attend a single community function." Walter attempted to call for order, but Karen was beyond restraint. "This board is clearly corrupt," she continued, stabbing a finger in my direction. "He probably intimidated you with his badge. Is that what happened? Are you all too scared to stand up to him?" Several board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. One woman seated near Karen visibly edged away from her. "Karen," Walter said firmly, "your contributions to the community are appreciated, but they do not give you the right to use private property without permission or to file false police reports when confronted." "False reports," she scoffed. "I genuinely believed he was trespassing. How was I supposed to know who he was?" "Even if that were true," another board member interjected, "the security footage shows you directed people to use his property before he ever arrived. You knew it was not yours to use." Karen's entourage had shrunk away, distancing themselves from her increasingly erratic behavior. She stood alone now, her designer purse clutched to her chest like armor. "Well," she said, her voice cold and precise, "if this community does not appreciate my efforts, perhaps I should stop making them. No more fundraisers, no more social events, no more anything. Let us see how you all manage without me." Walter nodded solemnly. "That might be for the best, Karen. The board has also decided to dissolve the unofficial social committee you've been chairing, and will create a new, properly regulated committee with elected members. This final blow was too much. Karen grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit, pausing only to glare at me with undisguised hatred. "This is not over," she hissed as she passed. The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. In the awkward silence that followed, I noticed something interesting: relief on many faces. Karen's reign as the neighborhood's self-appointed social director had apparently not been as universally appreciated as she believed. After the meeting adjourned, several neighbors introduced themselves to me, offering sympathetic words and welcoming me properly to the community. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I might actually belong here. Ironically, thanks to Karen's attempt to drive me away. The following weeks brought a new pattern to my previously quiet existence. Karen had apparently decided that if she could not control the neighborhood, she would make sure no one had peace, especially me. It began with small annoyances. Trash bags that mysteriously appeared on my lawn, split open to spread their contents. Anonymous complaints to the HOA about non-existent violations at my house. Music blasting from her property at odd hours, particularly when she knew I would be trying to sleep after night shifts. I documented everything meticulously but took no immediate action. Years of police work had taught me patience. Evidence gathering was not just about collecting facts, it was about establishing patterns of behavior. Some neighbors urged me to retaliate, to give Karen a taste of her own medicine. But that was not who I was, either as a law enforcement officer or as a person. I continued my routine, courteous but cautious. 3 weeks after the HOA meeting, I returned home from a shift to find Karen watering plants along the property line between our homes. She ignored me completely as I parked my cruiser and walked toward my front door. The deliberate snub was almost comical in its childishness. That night, I was awakened by the sound of my security system alerting me to movement near my vehicles. On the camera feed, I watched in disbelief as a figure in dark clothing approached my cruiser, a can of spray paint in hand. Even with the poor lighting and attempt at disguise, there was no mistaking Karen's distinctive movements. I called the local police immediately, describing exactly what was happening and requesting officers respond without sirens to avoid alerting the vandal. Then I waited, watching the feed as Karen methodically sprayed something across the side of my department vehicle. Officer Hargrove was among the responding officers. They caught Karen literally red-handed, the spray paint still clutched in her grasp as they illuminated her with flashlights. The shock on her face was almost worth all the weeks of petty harassment. "This is a mistake," she stammered as they escorted her toward a patrol car. "I was just checking. There was someone suspicious. I was trying to help." Her excuses fell flat as the officers documented the damage, crude words accusing me of corruption and abuse of power now defacing state property. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. It was criminal vandalism of law enforcement equipment. I provided my security footage to the officers, along with documentation of the previous incidents. Officer Hargrove shook his head as he reviewed the evidence. "She really did not know when to stop, did she?" he remarked. Karen was taken into custody, processed, and charged with destruction of government property and criminal mischief. Her previously clean record was now permanently marred by her inability to accept that she had been wrong. When I arrived at the station the next day to provide my formal statement, several colleagues expressed disbelief at the situation. Some found dark humor in it. A civilian targeting a state trooper's marked vehicle was not exactly the crime of the century in terms of eluding capture. "You handled this exactly right," my supervisor told me after reviewing the case. "No escalation, no retaliation, just proper procedure and documentation. Textbook approach to a civilian harassment situation." I took no pleasure in Corinne's legal troubles, but I did feel vindicated. Throughout the ordeal, I had maintained my composure, never stooping to her level or abusing my position. The law had worked as it should, methodically, impartially, and ultimately effectively. News of Corinne's arrest spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some expressed shock, others admitted they had seen it coming. Walter called to offer the HOA's support if needed for court proceedings. The community that Corinne had tried to control through social manipulation was now united, not against her personally, but against the entitled behavior she represented. As I cleaned the spray paint from my cruiser, I reflected on the strange path that had led here. All of this because one woman could not accept that a driveway did not belong to her, that her social standing did not give her the right to claim whatever space she desired. The irony was that if she had simply apologized after that first confrontation, none of the subsequent events would have occurred. The paint came off with effort, but I knew that Corinne's actions had left marks that would not be so easily erased, on her reputation, on her record, and on her future in this community. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, starkly lit and furnished with the functional simplicity of places where serious matters are decided daily. I sat in the witness section, uniform pressed, notes organized, prepared to testify if needed. Corinne entered flanked by her attorney, her usual confident demeanor replaced by a subdued, almost meek presentation. Designer clothes had given way to a conservative suit. The wide-brimmed hat and pearls were notably absent. She avoided looking in my direction. The proceedings were surprisingly brief. Faced with overwhelming evidence, security footage, witness statements, and the literal writing on my cruiser, Corinne's attorney had advised her to accept a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to reduced charges of property damage and disorderly conduct, avoiding more serious charges of filing a false police report and harassment. The judge was stern but fair, noting Corinne's previous clean record while emphasizing the seriousness of vandalizing a law enforcement vehicle. The sentence: 6 months probation, community service, restitution for damages, and a restraining order requiring her to maintain distance from me and my property. As we exited the courtroom, Corinne's attorney approached me. "My client would like to offer a formal apology," he began. I raised a hand to stop him. "If she is genuinely remorseful, I accept that, but I do not need to hear it secondhand." The attorney nodded, seeming to understand. Behind him, Corinne stood stiffly, her eyes fixed on the floor. Whatever words might have been exchanged remained unspoken. 2 weeks later, a moving truck appeared in front of Corinne's house. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, watching as her belongings were loaded methodically. Some speculated she was moving closer to family in another state. Others suggested the community stigma had become too much to bear. I observed from my porch, sipping coffee from a mug emblazoned with my department's logo. Corinne emerged from her house occasionally to direct the movers, each time glancing briefly toward my property before quickly looking away. Our eyes never met. By evening, the truck was gone and the house stood empty. A "for sale" sign appeared in the front yard the following day. Corinne Fleming's chapter in our neighborhood had come to a close. That weekend, Walter and several board members stopped by my house, inviting me to a small community potluck. "Just a casual get-together," Walter assured me. "No fundraising, no agenda, just neighbors getting to know each other." The gathering was held in the proper community space, with all appropriate permissions secured. I brought a homemade lasagna, my late mother's recipe, and one of the few dishes I could prepare with confidence. For the first time since moving in, I met my neighbors as individuals rather than as observers to conflict. We shared stories, laughed, and found common ground. As autumn approached, I settled into a new routine. My shifts remained demanding, but I now found genuine comfort in returning home. Occasionally, I exchanged waves with passing neighbors. Sometimes I joined weekend community projects, helping repair the playground or planting flowers in the common areas. The house where Corinne had lived sold quickly. A young family moved in, with children who played in the front yard and a father who asked if I could speak to his son's school about career day. Life moved forward as it always does. One quiet morning, as dawn broke over the neighborhood, I sat on my front porch with my coffee. The air was crisp, carrying the first hints of fall. Birds called from nearby trees. A newspaper delivery person waved as they passed. In the peaceful stillness, it was hard to imagine the chaos that had once centered around my driveway. I reflected on how easily things could have gone differently. Had I lost my temper, had I used my position improperly, had I engaged in the petty warfare Corinne initiated, the outcome would have been dramatically altered. Justice had not required my rage or retaliation. It had required only patience and adherence to principle. My driveway was clear now, my lawn restored. The security cameras remained, silent sentinels that had proven their worth. But their presence no longer felt like a necessity born of conflict. They were simply a prudent measure, a professional habit carried into private life. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across my lawn, I found myself grateful for unexpected lessons learned. A neighborhood dispute had reinforced professional wisdom. Document everything, follow proper channels, maintain composure under pressure. But it had also taught me something about community, how easily it could fracture, and how deliberately it needed to be rebuilt. I finished my coffee and went inside to prepare for my shift. From my window, I could see children waiting for the school bus at the corner, parents chatting amicably nearby. Normal life, peaceful life. Corinne had called the police on me in my own driveway. But in the end, the badge she had mocked was what held her accountable, not through force or intimidation, but through the patient application of law and procedure. The system, imperfect as it sometimes was, had worked.